The Asante Empire, defying European superiority. The drums thundered through the forest that January morning in 1824, but it wasn't their usual rhythmic battle cry. This time, they played a different song, a hunter's tune that had British Colonel Charles McCarthy thoroughly confused. As his technologically superior forces pushed deeper into the African jungle, McCarthy remained confident in his European guns and training. He couldn't have known that the Asante Empire's warriors had lured his men into one of military history's most brilliant tactical traps, nor that his head would soon adorn the Asante King's drum, a stark reminder that the age of European invincibility was a myth. This is the story of how an African kingdom armed primarily with spears and shields repeatedly humbled the greatest military power on Earth, using a combination of psychological warfare, tactical brilliance, and cultural cohesion that military historians still study today. The Asante Empire didn't just resist European colonization, they shattered the notion of Western superiority, proving that innovation and adaptability could triumph over technological advantages. Their tale, centered around a mystical golden stool that united a people, would reshape our understanding of power, resistance, and the true nature of military might in ways that still resonate 2 centuries later. Forging an empire, the rise of the Asante nation. The name Asante emerged from the dense rainforests of West Africa like smoke from a blacksmith's forge, and like that forge, it would transform raw materials into something powerful and lasting. In the late 1600s, while Europe busied itself with its wars of religion, a visionary leader named Osei Tutu orchestrated one of history's most remarkable feats of nation-building. Rather than conquest alone, he wove together dozens of independent chiefdoms, using an instrument so brilliant in its conception that it would make Machiavelli envious. A simple wooden stool, allegedly descended from heaven. But this was no mere furniture. According to sacred tradition, the golden stool floated down from the sky in a cloud of white dust, landing gently in Osei Tutu's lap as his priest Okomfo Anokye summoned the chiefs of every major clan. The priest declared that the stool contained the spirit, the sunsum of the entire Asante nation. More radical still was his pronouncement that this spiritual power would forever be separate from any individual ruler. In a single masterstroke, Osei Tutu had created both a unifying national symbol and a check on absolute power that European monarchs of the time would have found incomprehensible. The Asante's growing influence rode on rivers of gold, literally. Their territory sat atop some of Africa's richest gold fields, and they transformed this natural blessing into a sophisticated economic engine. Their currency system, based on gold dust measured with precision brass weights, funded an administrative system so effective that it would make British colonists jealous a century later. Gold funded their military, their diplomatic corps, and a trade network that stretched from the Sahara to Europe's trading posts on the coast. But unlike other wealthy states, the Asante never became soft. They forged their gold into both jewelry and weapons, their traders were also warriors, and their kings were both politicians and battle commanders. This foundation of spiritual power, economic might, and military innovation would soon be tested against the most formidable military machine in world history. As the 18th century drew to a close, British ships began appearing more frequently along the Gold Coast, their cannon-studded hulls testament to European technological supremacy. The Asante watched, learned, and prepared. They would need every advantage their unique system could provide, for the clash to come would shake the foundations of both empires. Their neighbors called them Asantewaa, the people of war. Soon, the British would discover exactly why. The Asante, masters of adaptation and psychological warfare. The Asante Army moved like a living creature, each part synchronized in a deadly dance that defied European military logic. While their continental contemporaries marched in rigid formations, the Asante warriors flowed through the forest like mercury, their formations constantly shifting, adapting, dissolving, and reforming. At their peak, they could mobilize 200,000 warriors, a force larger than the entire British Army of the time, and do it faster than any European power could muster a single regiment. The core of this military machine wasn't the warriors themselves, but rather an innovation that military historians would later compare to the Roman legion, the company system. Each Asante company specialized in a specific type of warfare, with its own distinct training, tactics, and even psychological warfare techniques. The Akofofo were masters of close-quarter combat, trained to fight in the dense undergrowth where European formations became useless. The Gyase, the king's personal guard, developed techniques for fighting in absolute silence, allowing them to surround enemy camps without alerting a single sentry. Most terrifying were the Ankabia, who specialized in psychological warfare so effective that some British soldiers reported seeing ghosts during battles. Behind these elite units worked another innovation centuries ahead of its time, a dedicated logistics corps staffed primarily by women. While European armies struggled with supply lines and camp diseases, Asante forces stayed fed, equipped, and healthy through campaigns that would have broken other armies. These women, known as market women, weren't just suppliers. They were intelligence gatherers, field medics, and in some cases, combat participants. Their presence meant Asante forces could operate independently for months, appearing and disappearing like forest spirits, striking when and where they chose. But the true genius of the Asante military system lay in its drums. Each company had its own drum corps, using complex rhythmic codes to coordinate movements across vast distances. In battle, these drums didn't just relay orders. They told stories, mocked the enemy, and played on psychological weaknesses. British officers reported their men becoming unnerved by drums that seemed to call their names, taunt them with their fears, or predict their deaths. The Asante had transformed music into a weapon more effective than any musket. When the first major clash with European forces came, the British would learn too late that they weren't fighting primitives with spears. They were facing a military system that had evolved perfectly for its environment, led by commanders who understood something their European counterparts had forgotten. The mind is the strongest weapon in any warrior's arsenal. The Asante and the art of forest warfare. When the first Dutch traders arrived on the Gold Coast with their matchlock muskets and small cannon, the Asante didn't respond with fear. They responded with curiosity. While other African kingdoms either shunned European weapons or tried to copy European tactics wholesale, the Asante approached firearms the way a chess master studies a new opening, analytically, patiently, and with an eye toward exploitation. They purchased guns not to replace their traditional weapons, but to understand their weaknesses. In the dense rainforest, the Asante discovered what Vietnam's generals would realize centuries later. Terrain could neutralize technological superiority. European muskets, accurate to 100 yards in open field conditions, became virtually useless in the thick undergrowth where visibility rarely exceeded 20 feet. The much vaunted European artillery, which could devastate formations at range, couldn't elevate sufficiently to fire into the canopy where Asante marksmen perched. Most critically, the humid forest air played havoc with powder weapons, rendering them unreliable precisely when their users needed them most. The Asante's answer to firearms was one of military history's most elegant solutions: the shield wall reimagined. Their shields, made from hardened elephant hide and reinforced with metal, could stop musket balls at the ranges typical in forest fighting. But unlike European shield walls, which remained stationary, the Asante version was mobile. Warriors trained to run full speed while maintaining formation, closing the critical distance before musketeers could reload. Even more devastating was their practice of attacking during tropical downpours, when European firearms were rendered nearly useless. European observers were baffled by Asante warriors who seemed to appear from nowhere, fight with sophisticated coordination, and vanish into the forest, leaving only destruction behind. One British officer wrote home, "They fight like no savages I have ever encountered. They fight like they can read our minds." He wasn't far wrong. The Asante had developed an extensive intelligence network, studying European military manuals, observing training exercises, and even sending observers to watch European wars. By the time major conflicts erupted, they didn't just understand European warfare, they had already developed counters to tactics their enemies hadn't yet tried. As the drums of war grew louder and British expeditionary forces began pushing inland, the stage was set for a clash that would shatter European assumptions about warfare, technology, and the nature of military power. The Asante had turned their entire kingdom into a weapon. Every tree, every trail, every raindrop was a potential ally. When Colonel McCarthy led his troops into the forest in 1824, he thought he was hunting primitives. In reality, he was walking into one of the most sophisticated military traps ever devised. The British humbling, a lesson in strategy and adaptation. Colonel Charles McCarthy strode into what would become known as the Battle of Nasamankau, with all the arrogance that had come to define British colonial expansion. In his pocket was a written speech prepared in advance to accept the Asante surrender. In his train followed the finest European military technology of the age, hundreds of disciplined troops armed with the latest Brown Bess muskets, mobile artillery pieces, and rockets designed to terrify native forces into submission. What happened next would send shockwaves through the British Empire and force a complete re-evaluation of colonial military doctrine. The first sign that something was wrong came with the drums. Instead of the expected war rhythms, the forest echoed with hunting songs, traditional melodies used to track game. The British force found themselves following paths that seemed to lead nowhere, each trail promising a clear route to their objective, but somehow leading them deeper into the forest labyrinth. When the attack finally came, it defied every principle of warfare that McCarthy knew. The Asante struck from all directions simultaneously, their formations materializing from the forest like phantoms, fighting with a coordination that seemed impossible without modern communications. The battle became a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. British artillery, positioned to defend against frontal assault, found itself firing at shadows while the real attack came from behind. Ammunition carriers discovered their powder wet from humidity the British officers hadn't accounted for. Most devastating was the psychological warfare. Asante drums had switched from hunting songs to personal messages, calling out British officers by name, announcing their deaths moments before Asante warriors emerged to claim them. McCarthy's forces didn't just lose, they disintegrated. The aftermath sent tremors through the colonial world. McCarthy's head, preserved in gold, became a powerful symbol of Asante military prowess. But more significant was the captured British military equipment, which the Asante systematically studied and catalogued. They didn't trophy their victories, they learned from them. Each engagement with European forces refined their tactics further, creating a military doctrine that combined traditional African warfare with a sophisticated understanding of modern military science. For the first time, a colonial power had to seriously consider the possibility that technological superiority wasn't enough. The British Army, which had confidently subdued vast swaths of the globe, found itself forced to completely rethink its approach to colonial warfare. In London's military academies, officers began studying Asante tactics, realizing too late that they had severely underestimated the sophistication of African military thinking. The myth of European military invincibility had been shattered, not by superior technology, but by superior strategy, adaptation, and understanding of the battle space. In the forest clearings where the battle took place, local people still say you can sometimes hear drums. Whether spirit or memory, they serve as a reminder that power comes not from the weapons you possess, but from how intelligently you use them. The golden age of the Asante Empire. In the wake of their stunning military successes, the Asante Empire entered a period of cultural flourishing that would rival the Italian Renaissance. The capital city of Kumasi grew into a metropolis that left European visitors speechless, its broad avenues lined with flowering trees, its markets humming with commerce from across 3 continents, and its craftsmen producing works of such sophistication that they would later fill Europe's finest museums. One Portuguese trader wrote home, "I have seen London and Paris, yet Kumasi makes them seem provincial." At the heart of this golden age stood the Asantewaa, the Queen Mother, whose power often exceeded that of the king himself. While European monarchies relegated their queens to ceremonial roles, the Asante Queen Mother held the power to make or break kings. She controlled the selection of heirs, managed the empire's vast intelligence network, and served as the final court of appeal in legal matters. Through this unique system of dual monarchy, the Asante achieved a political stability that enabled their arts and sciences to flourish. The Queen Mother's courts became centers of innovation, where traditional practices merged with new ideas from across the globe. The sophistication of Asante civic organization bordered on the miraculous. While London and Paris still dumped their sewage in the streets, Kumasi had developed an advanced sanitation system. Their urban planners created a city grid that maximized airflow and minimized disease spread, integrated green spaces for both practical and aesthetic purposes, and established the world's first known system of urban forest management. The famous Asante gold weights, used for trade, represented a mathematical precision that wouldn't be matched in Europe for another century. But perhaps most remarkable was the Asante judicial system. While European courts still relied on torture and superstition to establish guilt, Asante courts had developed a sophisticated system of forensic investigation. Their judges, trained in both legal precedent and practical psychology, achieved such a reputation for fairness that neighboring kingdoms often sent their most difficult cases to Kumasi for judgment. The saying arose, "Justice like gold comes from the Asante." This flowering of culture wasn't limited to the elite. The Asante developed one of history's first systems of universal education, teaching not just practical skills, but philosophy, history, and the arts. Their textile makers developed techniques so advanced that European manufacturers would later steal their methods to launch the Industrial Revolution. Their metallurgists created alloys that modern scientists are still trying to reverse engineer. Even their system of waste management and recycling wouldn't be matched until the late 20th century. The Asante Golden Age represented something unprecedented, an African civilization that hadn't just resisted European domination, but had created a genuine alternative to European models of progress. In their courts, their workshops, and their schools, they were developing answers to the fundamental questions of human organization that differed radically from Western assumptions. Had history taken a different turn, Kumasi might have become what London eventually did, the capital of a global empire based on radically different principles. The long resistance, the Asante Empire's fight for identity and survival. History rarely provides perfect endings. The Asante Empire's final chapter wouldn't be written in a single dramatic battle, but through decades of fierce resistance that would redefine the very nature of colonial struggle. As the 19th century waned, the British Empire, stung by its earlier defeats, returned with a new strategy: economic warfare. They didn't just want to defeat the Asante, they wanted to erase them from history. Enter Asantewaa, the Queen Mother of Ejisu, who would orchestrate one of history's most remarkable last stands. When the British governor Frederick Hodgson committed the ultimate sacrilege by demanding to sit upon the golden stool, the sacred soul of the Asante nation, Asantewaa, rose like a storm. "If you men are too weak to fight," she declared to the assembled chiefs, "then we women will. I shall call upon my fellow women. We will fight till the last of us falls in the battlefields." Her words ignited the War of the Golden Stool, a conflict that would shake the British Empire to its foundations. The war that followed proved that the Asante spirit of innovation hadn't dimmed. Unable to match British numbers, they developed new guerrilla tactics that would later inspire independence movements across Africa. They transformed their ancient drum communications into a sophisticated code system that British intelligence never managed to crack. Most ingeniously, they created a parallel economy that operated entirely outside British control, using ancient trade routes and secret markets to maintain their independence. But the true genius of late Asante resistance lay in their cultural preservation. As British forces systematically attempted to dismantle Asante society, the people responded by embedding their traditions in new forms. Sacred rituals went underground, disguised as Christian ceremonies. Historical knowledge was preserved in seemingly innocent songs and children's games. The famous Asante Kente cloth, banned by colonial authorities, was secretly woven with patterns that contained encoded messages and historical records. The British would eventually declare victory, but it was a hollow one. They had captured territory, but failed to conquer the culture. The golden stool, which they desperately sought as a symbol of dominance, remained hidden, protected by an intricate network of ordinary citizens who understood that physical freedom might be lost, but cultural identity could survive. When the stool was finally revealed decades later, it emerged untouched, a testament to the power of a people's determination to preserve their heritage. The Asante had learned and taught a lesson that would echo through the colonial age. True power lies not in weapons or territory, but in the unbreakable spirit of a people who know who they are. Their resistance created a template that future generations would follow in their own struggles for independence, proving that even in defeat, a nation could plant the seeds of its future rebirth. The legacy and lessons of the Asante Empire stand in modern Kumasi today, amidst the whirl of motorcycles and smartphones, and you'll still feel the pulse of the Asante Empire beating beneath the surface. The Asantewaa, the king, though no longer wielding political power, commands such respect that even Ghana's presidents seek his counsel. In his court, ancient ceremonies continue unbroken, a living bridge between centuries. But the true legacy of the Asante runs deeper than ceremony. It flows through the very veins of modern Africa's struggle for identity and self-determination. Military academies around the world now study Asante tactics in their courses on asymmetric warfare. The Battle of Nzamankau appears in textbooks alongside Kane and Austerlitz as an example of how superior strategy can overcome technological advantages. But perhaps more significantly, the Asante model of cultural resistance, their ability to adapt without surrendering their essence, has become a blueprint for indigenous peoples worldwide fighting to preserve their heritage in a globalizing world. Look closely at the fabric of modern Ghana, and you'll find Asante innovations woven throughout. Their ancient system of checks and balances between male and female authority has influenced modern African feminism. Their techniques for sustainable forest management are being studied by environmental scientists seeking solutions to climate change. Even their gold weights, those precise little brass sculptures that once measured trade, have found new life inspiring a generation of African mathematicians and artists. The golden stool still exists, no longer hidden but proudly displayed on ceremonial occasions. It serves as more than just a relic. It's a reminder that true power comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the capacity to maintain one's identity against overwhelming odds. In an age when cultures across the globe face homogenization, the Asante legacy offers a different path: adaptation without surrender, innovation without loss of identity, resistance without hatred. Perhaps that's the final lesson of the Asante Empire, that greatness lies not in the empires we build, but in the values we preserve. Their spears may have defeated European guns in the forest battlefields of the Gold Coast, but their greatest victory was in showing the world that no force, no matter how technologically advanced, can conquer the human spirit when it knows who it is and what it stands for. In an age of increasing cultural conflict, it's a lesson we would do well to remember.